Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second segment of the panels. And I have to say, I have a very interesting panel because all three of you are from, working in different spaces, and yet there's a common thread, and that's with people, with communities, and also, culture that's we're living. So I start with you, Mahua, and I have to ask you, through your work in writing, podcasting, how have you come to see culture as something which is not static, but is connected with, living people and living beings?
I think with my podcasting and every story that I encounter, whether it's in a small town, it's in a large city, culture keeps adapting, to the environment. Sometimes it's political, sometimes it is displacement, sometimes it is memory, sometimes it's death. And I think that it's also when you leave, your own country and you go out. For example, when I travel out, beyond a point, I start missing my food. I start missing the language, and that you try and find with the ingredients that you have around. I think food is an amazing thing when you look at it because you can take different kind of ingredients and create a dish that you would have eaten with your grandmother. And so culture can never ever be static. I think it has to keep adapting, and without it adapting to new things around it, it would die.
But then you must have come across like very interesting stories. You move spaces, you've lived in different places, you carry an identity with you. There's also typecasting of people, over a period of time.
Yes, as a Bengali, throughout my years in Delhi, everybody thought that I would be very easy to sleep around with. Or I did black magic. So they would invariably, so I had somebody who had asked me that, Bengali ho, aap to bahut fast honge. So I said, nahi, what was her name, the fastest runner, I said that she's not a Bengali, she's somebody else. I tried to not understand. So I think stereotyping is really sad. And just recently one, you know that there's a Northeastern boy who was 27 years old and he was beaten to death. And, constantly because of the features from the Northeast, you're called a chinky, And for me, for very long, I was hiding the fact that I am from the Northeast and I'm a Bengali. I was very ashamed in the school that I'd gone into because there were a lot of Welsh girls around and they all had blonde hair and, they had blue eyes and they were all very, they were very with it, unlike the middle class background that I came from where my hair was oiled. So for very long, I didn't tell people, Navneet, that my name was Bohua. So every time my parents wouldn't look, I would say my name is Maxine because she was the sexiest girl in school. And then you finally get caught that, okay, you're not Maxine, you're Mohua Bhattacharya, coming from this very, very middle-class background where everything about you is so Bengali and you will be eating your food with your hands and there isn't fork and knife every time and, food that's cooked sometimes. And there was insurgency in Shillong where shops were shut. And of course, it's really sad that India is now waking up to the Northeast. We were marginalized, So, yeah, I mean,
it's interesting because in my part of the world, in newsrooms, you have a lot of Bengalis and we connected with intellect. I mean, it's a language that, one understands, but maybe speaks a little. That's what, yeah.
Yeah, but I think many Bengali girls will tell you this, that they've heard this, that Jadoo Tona is something that I love that. So whenever they say that to me, I tell them that we have this spice called Panchforon. So the minute we get married, we make the husbands eat Panchforon and they are dominated by us. So you should also try it.
When you do your podcast, select, people that you have conversations with, what is it that you're looking at and how do you get them to, speak their stories, share their story?
So, my podcasting journey was really by accident because I was a homemaker for very long. And I'd forgotten language, I'd forgotten alphabets. I just thought that the smartest thing that I could do was write this report with great English that I had, my son's report cards. So podcasting was something that I kind of chanced upon when I went into a cafe and there was a lot of youngsters, many years younger than me. They were all saying that today the world is waking up to podcasting. And I said, I don't know what the hell that is, okay? But I began podcasting, and I think it came to me at the right time. I know there are too many young people today who are doing podcasts, and I feel quite old being in my 50s, but I feel that life has taught me so much, betrayal, displacement, moving around, from places, learning to adapt to my culture. There's a certain humility and empathy that life has taught me. Not this that I was born with all of this. I was quite a terrible person, many years back. And I think that helps because I think, when the guests come and they talk to you, they open their heart and they talk to you, and everybody relates to memories. So, and memory can't be done, in history books. Memory is what, today if you ask me, what is it that I remember a dish that my Thakuma made, And for me today, I think language, it holds, I have such pathos inside me because I know that Bangla will probably end with me. So with the podcasting, I feel that everybody has this sort of a story to share. That they are looking back at something or they've gone through something in life. And of course, my guests are also people who are, who really swam against the current. They're not people who've because I love talking to them, I see a bit of my life when I talk to them. So it's very inspiring to meet people who are holding on, to things that mean a lot to them, and it serves the community around.
Any interesting story that left, a deep impression?
Oh my God, there are. I think I'm slightly crazy because for me, sublimation was through writing and podcasting. I did not know which other way I could turn my grief into something that I would not lash out at somebody else. So there are stories from all over the world, and the stories that stay too much in my heart are the stories of these girls from the Kamatipura red light area, and their daughters. There was a bar dancer's daughter, and she said for very long she didn't know that her mother was going into work in the evenings dressing up, and when she was young she didn't understand why others in the school wouldn't want to be friends with her. And of course, like anyone else, her mother was aspirational, put her into a school where she wanted her to be different. But the struggle that she went through, and that's when you start thinking that, there's so much happening all around you, and we know so little. And, mainstream media are only going to talk to people who've gone into schools and they speak English. And I'm very privileged. And even the word privilege, I don't think is a privileged word, right? And so these kind of stories, and there were stories also from South Africa where we've had a lawyer and activist who speaks about breast ironing, and this is your grandmother and mother who's, heating up a bat and beating your breast down, bandaging it for the fear of rape. And that's when you realize that, I can walk around, without thinking, whether my neckline is deep or whether, your breasts are probably showing somewhere. Yes, you have to worry if you're in India and you can't probably just, but you're not leading that life. Then there's female genital mutilation. We've had people from the Bori community, and there was this girl where her grandmother, and they the mothers and the grandmothers are so misogynistic that they will explain to you why it is good for you. So these stories, and we've had stories from all over India where, where people have done things not for money. And I think I value that tremendously. Yeah.
From living stories to heritage, Atul, I come to you. You turned to conservation by choice, and it was a passion project, like you shared. Tell us more about your journey and how did you get into it, and it led you to where you are today.
So I started a little late because I always used to enjoy heritage, and my business took me to different places in India and abroad. And I always thought that doing something in heritage will be very exciting. So though I'm not a historian or an architect, I just there came a time, when I reached a certain age, I said, ab kuch dil ka kaam karna hai. So that's when I started. I said that what would I like to do? And I thought that working with heritage will be a lot of fun. So without really any understanding or knowledge, I had an old ambassador car, and I wandered. Rajasthan was always close to my heart. And I wandered all over Rajasthan, and I came to a region which is called Shekhawati, where all the Marwadis come from these regions. And all of them made these palatial Havelis, thinking that they would all retire here. But the camel trade had moved to the sea trade, so they all shifted to Calcutta and Mumbai and all over the world, in fact, never to come back. So there were these Havelis which were practically deserted and just with a caretaker in some of them, and all of them falling down. So I thought that this could be a very good region to start my journey into heritage. And I started restoring, and as I said, that I wasn't trained in it, but the on-ground training with the old masons, the old workers, I kind of, they were my advisors. They were not really working on those projects, but they were my advisors, and that's how I restored 6 Havelis in Shekhawati region. To me, saving a Haveli is like saving a life. So such beautiful Havelis, especially there is one which is called the Museum Hotel, Vivana Museum Hotel. If I would have not taken over, they were bringing it down and they were making it into a shopping mall or something like that. So it's so sad to see that all the Havelis are falling apart, all the heritage is falling apart, and I just thought in my own small way I could do something with it. And then of course I read an article in Times of India about the falling Havelis of Old Delhi. So that's I went looking for the particular Haveli which was mentioned in that article, and luckily I could take over, and now I run a cultural center there, which is called Kathika Cultural Center, and we are having a lot of fun there.
Driving through the country, it is very interesting to see, that the landscape used to change at one time. Buildings had a character. Each, region had its own style of buildings. So to revive that and to get back to it, and now people want just modern buildings. You see flats coming up. You don't see, the old, style anymore. Did you face any problem from the locals, when you were trying to conserve the Havelis, of why are you trying to, bring commercial aspect to it, or why are you trying to bring more tourism into the place?
Sure. So definitely, when they see an outsider, I would say Rajasthan is a little better. People are more understanding because they are more exposed to tourism, I would say. But I feel that whatever project you do, like for example in Old Delhi, when I started Kathika, everybody thought I'm an outsider. But when we kind of work with them, so I have a lot of these community evenings. When there is, even in Rajasthan, I have a lot of community evenings. And with the children there, I do a lot of work. When there are their holidays, they have painting classes, they have Kathak classes. So you have to get the community with you. So now I feel that they feel, now they've come to they feel that this is their own space. So that way I could integrate with the community, and it's worked very well.
Have you woven in any rituals or any, the dinacharya, as they say, in part of your the projects that you are handling?
Can you repeat the question?
So, normally in a old, like when we say we're trying to revive a culture, one wants to imitate the culture of the state, for instance. So have you introduced any rituals? Are there any, activities or acts that are very similar, or you carrying them as a thread which are a signature to what you put out? So
today I think even the travel, it's not just about seeing the Havelis or the monuments. I think it's more experiential. So like one of the things may not be totally the answer for your question, but one of the things we do, like when we go to Europe, there is something called strawberry picking. Everybody keeps talking about going to the farms and strawberry picking. I do something called the chili picking. Why can't we do the similar thing? So we have all our guests, especially when we have groups, we go to the farm and we do chili picking, sit under a tree, make pakoras. Everybody doesn't have the chili pakoras. But, the whole idea about going to the farm, chili picking, and then sitting under a tree and enjoying the evening. So I guess you have to create experiences. And that is probably the key. Even, people go for like the area where I am, like the Shekhawati area is famous for the frescoes. So we have these fresco workshops, which is on the walls. Usually frescoes are on the outer side of the Havelis. So we do the fresco making. There is a lot of other activities also which happen. So we definitely promote them. And I see that people want activities also added in their itinerary. It's not just about sightseeing and seeing the buildings. As you said, there has to be some life. Even like in Navalgarh, I have made it's a museum hotel. So there, even the museum is not about the objects. It's also about stories. People are more interested in the stories. So that's what I work on. And again, I mean, I curated it myself and I kept the younger audience in mind. Sometimes the younger audience feel that going to a museum is very boring. So I don't have a problem, when I have created Instagrammable, locations or selfie points. I think it's okay. I think even the museums are evolving today. You need to make it more interactive, I would say.
I'm going to come back to you about the younger audiences, but I have to ask, Donna, about the rituals from somebody who comes from Assam. Tea is, something you connect instantly. But growing up in a tea plantation to moving to, putting it out as a ritual, as an experience, how has your, journey evolved?
Very surprising, actually, because I come from a plantation background, and we have a attitude that my mom does not drink anything which is 1 week old tea, for example. And for me, anything older than that was bad tea, because and then I started looking at the consumer's point of view, and then I realized, oh my God, every tea has a price. It might not be the best grade, but it is efficient. But my dad or his colleagues are producing such great quality, good grade teas, but it's not coming to you guys. To where is it going? So it was a bit shocking for me, because I thought that everybody was drinking the good teas. And sadly, I realized that because of the milk and the spice and the masala chai which goes around, the know-how and the original way of tea making is dying today. So it was very shocking for me. Yeah.
But you're humanizing, tea, because tea often is seen as a commodity.
Right.
You, in a way, humanize it by, adding experience and ritual to it. How do people perceive it now when you talk to them and, share the
People are very positive about it. They were like, okay, even the simplest usual grade, the masala chai grade, when I bring it to so for me, tea does not have taste, does not have a class. And as much as I try to speak to the Michelin star chef, I also try to go to the street and I speak to the ladies who are selling bananas, for example. So, and because everybody deserves a good cup, and when I bring that cup of tea to the akka, who I live in Pondicherry, so akka, we call the ladies akka. So I bring that tea and make her taste. They're like, oh my God, this kind of tea exists. So they are surprised and they were like, why is it not coming to us? And in the same way, the same teas are brought to the Michelin chef, and I make them understand what is a black tea, what is a white tea, what is a green tea. And these teas all come from the same bush. Most of the people do not know about it. So it has been very engaging and interesting discussing with people, and I think people are still exploring. I always try to put forward the tea first, before storytelling, before history, before the spice, before the milk, before anything, because I think taste is universal, and I think you make people taste and they know what it is. You can connect to you take a walk in the forest, and that smell which you kind of had, you actually get that same flavor when you sip autumn flush Darjeeling, for example, So these are the engagement I do, and it's very engaging, and I think people really like it. I think.
What are the kind of audiences that you are able to?
Different audiences. So I have been doing tea tasting and tea pairing, and trying to push tea in the gastronomy space. And it all started. I started this because I was very irritated with the fact that uh, tea, all the tradition and the information which is about tea has been gate kept by the tea industry people, and most of the information do not come to the consumers, to us, and there's a lingo we all speak in the tea world which the normal consumers do not understand, and so I have been basically doing tea pairings with Michelin chefs. Then I have been bringing tea chocolates. So basically, tea infused chocolates where tea is worked with Indian cacao. I only work with Indian teas. So I work with, again, Indian cacao, and I bring the two terroirs together and allow both the terroirs to speak individually, not to dominate each other, but kind of push forward. For example, the Godavari cacao has very acidic flavor, and the Assam tea has a nice malty, fruity flavor, right? So when I put both together, the acidic flavor of the cacao kind of gets beautifully blended with the fruitiness and the maltiness of the Indian, the Assam tea, the high grade Assam tea, and then it becomes into a very amazing, beautiful dark chocolate, or so something of that sort. And then also I go towards the mixology, how to use tea instead of seltzer or Coca-Cola or Sprite. Why not use tea as your base? So I work with a lot of mixologists. I also try to push forward non-alcoholic tea mocktails, zero-proof cocktails. I mean, that is something which most of us are looking towards today. Drinking has kind of gone down a lot today. And but also I work with, I go walk around in Pondicherry. I have some samples of tea. Whenever I get the time, I brew that tea in the Pondicherry market, or if I'm doing a road trip, I chat with the chai wala and I'm like, try this. Have you tried this tea? So it's wherever I can brew a cup of tea, I am brewing a cup of tea and making people taste, and sharing a bit of knowledge of different terroirs and what is green tea and what is black tea and what is white tea.
But is it easy talking to a chai wala? Because our definition of chai by the roadside is a kadak chai.
Yes. So the correctness comes, okay, again, so it's interesting. So my tea is definitely also correct because I'm bringing a good grade city seed to the chai wala. It's not necessary that tea should not, again, it should not be, it's like this tea is a good tea and that tea is a bad tea. Of course, we should preserve the loose leaf tea which my dad is manufacturing or other tea estates are manufacturing. But also, we should not ignore the backbone of our country, which is the Karak chai. And the Karakness comes from the Assam. Without Assam, there is no Karakness. And most of the time, what is happening is in your chai, you have the Assam dust mix in it. And then but if I'm taking a very good grade CTC, which is, there's no dust, but the top grade CTC, they get correctness and they get the flavor of tea and the color of tea, So they're very happy. They're like, wow, this is amazing. And I'm like, this should come to you and you should look for this kind of tea when you are going and buying from someone.
But have you been able to convert any of the chai walas to, adopting a finer tea?
Yes. There is a bit of, I have a gang of chai walas who take my tea.
That's...
Yeah, I mean, it's not I'm not selling the tea, but I try to bring the tea from Assam and make sure that, they get. So what happens is a lot of times through transportation, the tea flavor kind of gets polluted, or moisture and tea just does not go along very well. So I make sure that the tea comes in the right way and they get it. And then they're happy and they're brewing it. Yeah.
Any which way, taking tea to a coffee drinking country, part of the world is a challenge. So
Yes,
that's good
but they
job.
actually are into tea a lot. At 10 o'clock, they need their tea. In the morning, they're drinking a cup of tea. But coffee is like more like hospitality, You're like, do you want a cup of coffee? It's the cafe culture today also, you see, do you want to grab a cup of coffee? That's how on Instagram they speak, It's not, do you want to... But everyone is actually behind in their house drinking that cup of tea, Be it a good great tea, loose leaf tea or a chai. Yes.
Atul, you mentioned about, younger, generation, like, young ones coming and joining you for Kathika and other tours. What is the kind of curiosity that they carry with them? The questions?
First of all, most of the youngsters, when they talk about, if I talk about Kathika, most of them think that Old Delhi is extremely busy and, it's like not so clean and, they have those, that is the perception. So once they get into our Haveli and, Kathika, so I show them what the Havelis looked like earlier. So they definitely are intrigued and they enjoy the space because the Haveli architecture and it's like what we talk about green buildings, those Haveli architecture is a green building, so they enjoy the space. And we usually have cultural activities like and the thing is that they are not just seeing the performance, they are also part of it. So every day we have a sitar and a Kathak performance which happens there, and calligraphy. So for example, after the Kathak there is a workshop. So for the younger people and not only them, for all the visitors, then we have a workshop of Kathak. So I think involving them and making it interactive is the key. Then we have very interesting stories. I'll share a story from Old Delhi. So there is something called in English language, there's a word called Cobra effect. Do you guys know about Cobra effect? Yeah, you heard of it, right? So Cobra effect comes from Old Delhi. When the Britishers came to Old Delhi, there were lots of cobras in Old Delhi at that time, So the women, they were their girlfriends, their wives, their mothers. They said that we can, it's different climate, it's different food, all that is okay. One thing we can't stand are the cobras in the city. So they took out a farman that if you give us a dead cobra, we'll pay you certain annas. So they thought they'll get rid of the cobras of Old Delhi, but every home started rearing cobras in their backyard. So that by the end of it, there were more cobras in Delhi than ever before. So that kind of backfired, and those are the kind of stories when we show them around the artifacts and not really the artifacts, but related to our stories, that keeps them engaged and that keeps them excited. And the very idea of going to a museum, again, I think that is evolving. As I said earlier, the museum space also has to be interactive and engaging, especially the youngsters. That is important.
Mahua, what kind of emerging, shifts have you seen in the cultural narratives or the stories that, with people are weaving? Do you notice any, when you speak to people, do you notice a shift in the way they perceive culture, or, what is it that is kind of, egging them on? Now that they don't really have that kind of history and, people to talk about culture to them, perhaps, it's only a memory with a certain age group.
Well, I do think that the younger generation are way more prouder of their own culture than what we were. I think there's a huge number of us where we had aspirational parents who put us into schools that were English medium. We did not learn our language very well. I think today's youngsters are, for example, when you speak to Donna, she's talking about tea. And it's the truth that at home, all of us have had tea. In a Bengali home, we've had tea. coffee was never ever part of this whole thing till I kind of grew up and I understood that, oh, coffee is very cool, so I need to have coffee. And now I'm a coffee addict. I do drink my coffee. But I think the younger generation are really doing amazing things. There are festivals where they are bringing in artists from all over. I think it's wonderful because I think they also take forward the memory that they have. Because history books, texts will not be able to tell you small details about how they have learned something. For example, my grandmother used to oil my mother's hair. She oiled my hair. And I did that for my son. And I know that sometimes, now he doesn't live in India. And when I go to him, he wants that once in a while, And it's nothing, but I think it's that memory. It's the way they're trying to hold on to things. And, just recently, actually in Bangalore, there was this huge art fest, and all of them were young people who had completely put together this absolutely amazing art festival where you had musicians and artists from all over the world, and each one of them, and I think also identity today, I don't understand identity in its complete depth, and I think youngsters today are struggling with all of this, but they're so brave to look at it in its face and say that we are going to tackle this, keeping our ethos, keeping our literature, keeping our music, keeping our food, all of that. So I'm very fascinated with young people because I think, they are way more, they've embraced culture way more than what my generation did.
So many of them are going back to it, in fact.
Yes.
What they hear, like collecting vintage stuff, which probably
Yeah.
is like, or listening to 90s songs or even earlier
Food.
than that. Food.
In
also.
restaurants, you're going to find these very, these kind of food that, this comfort food, and they've mixed it with some other ingredient, and, they've made such a wonderful dish out of it, because sometimes what happens that traditional Bengali food can be very, it may not be palatable for a lot of people because mustard oil can be tart, It's very regular cooking Bengali food is very bland. And most people don't understand unless they're like overwhelmed with all the spices. But youngsters have been able to balance this so beautifully. And that kudos to them.
A lot of times, this is a question which is common to all of you. The educators or people who are trying to raise awareness sometimes come from a certain segment. And people we are talking to, are a different world. There can be a disconnect. How do you deal with that disconnect? Like for you at tea plantations, perhaps, Donna, maybe people who are working at the tea estates. How do you connect with the communities and, get them to believe in what you are trying to showcase and put out?
Oh my God, that's first when my mum, dad heard me, and my uncle, who is also a very well-known tea taster, were like, why do you want to do this? Why are you getting into tea? I was like, and this was their reaction, and they were absolutely, everybody in the industry were unhappy with the fact that I wanted to educate and bridge the gap between the tea industry and the consumers. And they were also worried the fact that I will give away all the trade secrets of the industry, because I say it, I try to work with Indian teas. I educate people about Indian terroirs and the high-grade, beautiful teas which are manufactured in our country. I take it to people. I make people taste them, and they were not very happy about it. They were like, everybody wants City. Everybody wants the normal granular tea. Why are you even trying to do this? It's a waste of time. You will just feel like a failure, and then you'll be sad. And this was their reaction. But it's been 5 years, and recently I got an award from the Academy of Chocolate when I did the whole tea chocolate this thing. And I've been working with different chefs, and so they're seeing that there is, they're taking it very positively. Estates now are again going back and trying to preserve the original way of making tea. The my community, I come from Thai home community. We came down 800 years back from Yunnan, the present day Yunnan province of China, which is then was Mongmao, and we brought tea with us, and tea was growing in the wild, and we started making tea in an original way. We make our own smoked tea, so that is now being preserved, and there's been people are trying to kind of preserve that tradition. So yeah, the reaction now is changing a bit in the industry, and also they're happy the fact that I am taking forward the Indian teas to the world, and to the street also.
Atul, how are you engaging the communities, or the local people?
So, one of the things, when I go to my village, there's a small village called Chudi Ajitkar. So my neighbor will come and say that, Khanna sahab aiye, aapko chai pe bulate hain. So, and, he would have destroyed his beautiful Haveli and made a city home, homes that we make in our cities. And he will be so proud of the fact that the old building is gone, now have a most beautiful city kind of a home. So I realized that one of the things which I had to convey to them, and at that moment I can't tell him that what have you done, that'll be very, he won't like it. So I realized that is very important to send the message that how important heritage is. So I have started something called the Virasat Ki Pathshala. This is for the young kids of Shekhawati. So what Virasat Ki Pathshala does is that they make them understand about their heritage and why they should be proud about their heritage. I feel sometimes the message sent to the kids and when they send it to their parents is most effective. This happened during Diwali when my son told me no crackers, it causes pollution. So I feel that is one way we can send the message to them that they should be extremely proud about their heritage. So the community engagement, which I spoke about earlier also, and is important. One of the things also which is missing in the Shekhawati region, that the children, the youngsters are very talented, extremely hardworking, but in the real world, sometimes the communication skills are not there, whether it is in English or in any other way. So that's another thing we are working on with the community, how to improve the communication skills of the youngsters in the area. And then for the adults, we keep having programs, like cultural programs and something which they can relate to. And all the pujas, whether it is the Ganesh Utsav, whether all their festivals we celebrate with them. Like the Dashera at Kathika has become quite famous because all the kids of that surroundings, we celebrate Dashera with them. So that's the way we connect with them.
Mahua, through your podcast, like when you do your podcast, how do you think the storytelling medium, as a medium, can help in, can continue the culture, the culture continuity? How do you think the platform can be used to reach out to as many?
SEO. From the storytelling perspective, I think every story, every guest that comes onto the podcast, and also I write books. And honestly, my inspiration is not in these very large apartments or these big houses, because people take very long to break those walls before they start opening up. And I do a lot of writing on gender. I feel that, you have stories when you go, in these crowded lanes, you talk to a person who's there, who's probably, traveled distance trying to educate their child, and then they've come there and they're trying to do something. So, of course, they are not the ones who come to my podcast, but just for example, I've just recently just written an article. I was coming here to Delhi, and there was this Nepali woman who was traveling for the first time, on an aircraft, and she's been away, and she has to look after her mother who's bedridden, and so she told me about, and she was constantly clicking pictures to the annoyance of everyone, and she wouldn't hang up because everybody was calling her to see what the aircraft looks like, and and the airport and all of that. And then after a point, I really sat down and I thought that this was just a woman who's probably from a different, strata than mine. But then eventually, we're both caregivers and we're both women. And we were bonded somewhere in that same, she had resentment, she had hope, she had love, and she had all of that together, So my muse is always, I think, in crowded lanes, in places where there's no pretense. And I will continue to do that forever, bring out stories of real people, because that's where change is. When you see a girl in a village who's been able to travel that distance, go out there, pick up a few words of English because she needs to, and then earn a living for her family, that's my muse.
Going to open the, questions for the floor.
Mama, I want to ask you something on this. It's a very confusing state, actually, where when we talk about culture and continuity, and a lot of young people, one would imagine, with education and urbanization, yet we, like the incident you talked about, that Northeastern person, and it happens across the board, this confusion of mythology and superiority complex and majoritism, whether it's religion, culture, or politics, whatever that is. I think I just want you to reflect on that, because I think that's really troubling that the patriarchy or the uncle brigade of my generation, deciding what is right or wrong. And the ultimate marginalization is obviously women, because traditionally that's the way. And it's my gender not able to deal with the idea of the identity because they've seen their mothers and their sisters in a certain way. So that's a big struggle. So how do we kind of go through this thing where you don't mix up with the culture into mythology? And the mythology is such an easy ticket each time we want to impose anything, because you gotta be the Sita, if you know what I mean. But world is not about Sita anymore. And I don't have disrespect for Sita, of course, So anything on that, please?
Don't vote for BJP. Politically incorrect statement to make, but I think that they are trying to make everybody be proud of their religion, their identity, and we are, it saddens me. It breaks my heart when I see that so many of us are not thinking anymore. And we are following this narrative, which is a majority narrative, which is patriarchal. Patriarchy means that men are also bleeding in this, because men are not allowed to express. And there is rebellion. Marriages are falling apart, which it should, because it only serves men. And I just think that we are probably regressing in some form. But I'd also like to believe that nothing that's totalitarian can continue forever. There has to be upheaval. There has to be a churning. And if you talk about mythology, we know about the churning of the, and how you separated the poison from, the milk, right? And and so that churning has to happen. I would like to believe that. I hope I live till then, but I don't know. I hope I've been able to answer.
Thank you. Yeah. It always bothers you because when you start diluting your culture into mythology, it becomes such a free pass for the society to continue in that suppression, of the silent ones, women and the minorities, if you know what I mean. And I totally understand, when it's about right-wing politics especially, then the control is very easy to bring in religion because, it's not about fairness anymore. And I'm not talking about this country, not just one politics. It's across the world what's going on right now. Yeah. We have the trumpet playing in America equally, So, but, that's a very personal struggle a lot of us have. That, how do you draw that line? Because we are rich with our belief system. I do believe in the gods. I do believe in the culture. But if that becomes a reminder that that's the line drawn, that Lakshman Rekha has drawn for you, and you have to follow those rules. And I'm not suffering because I come from a very privileged space, forget anything else. I come from a male gender, that itself is privilege for me, But thank you.
So amazing that you're saying that you're privileged, because half the men today, they're talking about male loneliness without understanding why they're lonely.
Samar, if I may interject, that also happens when we don't have documented history. Because there are a lot of instances of, times that some, what mythological characters today are, there's a blurred line there, They may have existed, but in another form. And of course, the one who wins, gets to narrate the story their style. So I guess that also happens when we lack documentation and what we are passing on. So that is where perhaps storytelling and even sharing our stories with the younger generations is very important, or what we've carried, from the past, and perhaps what we can share forward.
I think that, social media today has really democratized content. And yes, there is a good and a bad to it. And, one has to understand that if there is such a huge surge in for people to be able to express, there will be a good and a bad, right? And that's where your intellect comes in, why you won't jump into the river without knowing how to swim. And I guess it's going to settle down over time. But I feel that today there are so many more creators who are also bringing and putting their entire cultural stories forward, taking, their folk tunes, their music, their food. And I think it's a great space to be, it's great times to be in also, from that perspective. Yeah, I mean, #MeToo would have never happened if it wasn't, this entire movement, right?
Definitely, there I agree with you
Yeah.
completely, because of course we're aware.
Yeah. Also 4B that's happening today in Korea. Women are saying we're not going to date men, we're not going to go out with men, we're not going to marry, we're not going to have children. And Korea, where everybody really looks up to these Korean men and, all these serials and all those things that happen. Yeah. So it's, yeah.
Any last words or anything that you'd like to, any thoughts that, come to you before we end the session?
I can just tell another story from Old Delhi that you guys, do you know the only queen, the only Christian queen that ruled in India? Anybody has an idea? That was Begum Samru. Bhagirath Place is the palace of Begum Samru, and she's got another a church and a palace near Meerut. So that's interesting. So come, enjoy more stories, discover Old Delhi. I think it's very interesting. And Shekhawati, of course.
I think, I would just like to share that, me coming from a younger generation, not the Gen Z, but maybe millennial. I think so, right? 39 is millennial, no? Right. So I think it's very important that culture cannot be shown in 10 seconds. Like from plucking the tea to all the problems, the chaotic times we went through around the 90s, which you all might know in Assam, right? It cannot be shown in 10 seconds. And I think people need to, like Atul said, and how Mahua also is trying to engage with people on the street. I think it's very important that everything, humanity needs to engage. And that's how I think we don't lack heritage. Heritage is there. And I think what we lack is education and visibility, and that can only happen through engagement with humanity, and it cannot be shown in 10 seconds. I mean, I cannot, like, people tell me, hey, can you make a reel of your tea brewing? But how do I do that in 10 seconds? It's very difficult. How do I show the taste, So I think, and I think authenticity is very important, but you need to have knowledge. You cannot just show, you can take a picture and make people be curious about someone's culture or someone who has done something. But I think you need to have knowledge, and then you go out and you kind of speak about it. And it's very important that you do the research, and then, I think, yeah.
Parting shots, Mahua.
Please go back and check out your parents' saris, your mother's saris, your grandmother's saris. Don't let them go, because they all have memory. And yeah, and then some of the food that is probably just going to come to an end with me. For example, just during this time, during winters in Bengal, we make pithe patishapta with a special jaggery that's made out of date palm. And my son doesn't know how to make it. I don't make it as well as my mother does. So somewhere that tradition is also dying. And I'm trying now, when I've, understood that a lot of all of this may die with me, I'm trying to bring those things back. And it's wonderful. It's fantastic to be able to do things with your hands. And, when you feel when you put that entire the rice powder and the coconut, and then you mix the jaggery, it is so meditative somewhere, and it's wonderful. And then you eat that, share that with everyone. So I guess for me, it's been a homecoming of sorts, and there is nothing more warmer than coming back home.
True that.
Can I just add something? I just, I see a lot of my friends, everybody's discovering the villages of Italy and other European countries. Time to discover your own villages. They are as beautiful. Also, something I see a lot of youngsters here, follow your passion. Don't wait too long, and doors will open once you follow your passion.
With that, thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you so much.
Carry
for
back
this.
the stories with us.
Thank you. What a wonderful panel discussion. And we come to the end of the panel discussions for the day, and we meet again tomorrow. Can I request Samar Jodha and Anita Horam to come and give away some gifts for the participating participants?